They Were the Last Resort, Part 8, by Hylian Hero 71. March 30, 2034, Conference Room 1, UHS, New Eden. Logan couldn't help but smile as he sat at the head of the long table beside General Johnson, waiting for the others. Considering the recent battle, the Alliance had requested an opening of diplomacy, and even though they didn't mention it, he knew they were looking for peace. As he stared out of the large window into the space beyond, he knew that for the first time, he held all the cards. As the two alien ships approached to dock, he knew this was going to be an interesting day. The negotiations would be mediated by a neutral third party, the New Order. Both sides knew the Order wasn't technically a neutral third party, but given that they had a rather evenly poor opinion of humanity, as well as the Alliance, they were allowed to attend. Logan suspected they might try to weasel out a better deal for the Alliance out of spite, but hopefully, the reminder of what happened in the battle would temper that idea. As the delegates from the Alliance and New Order entered the room, Logan eyed them up. The Alliance delegate was the same species as the late Krytek, and the New Order representative was the same species as Vizok, though it was clearly not him. He waited quietly as the security officers directed them to seats across from him, before standing at attention on either wall. The Alliance representative was clearly disconcerted, probably ashamed at having to bargain with humanity from an inferior position. The Order delegate hardly seemed to be in a better mood, but they seemed to be putting in a better effort to appear cordial. There they were, 2 humans on one side, 2 aliens on the other. There was a tense silence. Logan and Johnson were content to stay silent and force the aliens to act first. After so long, they both enjoyed watching them squirm.
Allow me to introduce myself, the Alliance delegate finally said. I am General Mortog, head of the armies of the Alliance.
And I am Furtak. I have been appointed to attend this meeting by the New Order,
the Order representative said, their voice clearly mock friendliness.
We are aware of who the two of you are,
Mortark said, even if Logan and Johnson had made no effort to introduce themselves.
Though I must say, I did not expect to meet you here, Admiral Wayne. A report said you were killed when your flagship was destroyed.
Were it so easy, Logan said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms, enjoying this. Regardless of how misinformed you are about the events of the battle, I'm alive. Let's just get down to business.
Of course,
Mortark said.
As you may be aware, the war situation has not necessarily developed to the advantage of the Alliance.
Ha, you could say that, Johnson said with a chuckle, getting an angry look from Mortark.
As a result of said circumstances, the Alliance is prepared to seek a settlement of hostilities with humanity,
Mortark said carefully, sliding a datapad across the table.
Save for a few important details, the Alliance is prepared to see the systems outlined in the demands issued before the onset of hostilities. As for the demand regarding extraditions, most of those involved have been killed under suspicious circumstances, so we consider the matter closed.
Logan and Johnson glanced at the datapad before glancing at each other. Well, you see, that's just not how this is going to work, Logan said, pulling out his own datapad, sliding it across much like Mortag did. When we made that offer, there were a lot of things we didn't know. The Alliance was in a much better position. You thought you could beat us. You were wrong. And any peace we make will have to reflect that. As Mortag picked up the pad and read through the significantly lengthened list of demands, Logan continued speaking. You'll note that the number of systems and light years demanded had been increased by a few zeros. Also included are more stipulations, Johnson added. The Alliance will admit publicly to its citizens and the galactic community what you did to humanity. We're not looking for an apology. We know it would be empty if you gave one anyway. You'll also find several stipulations regarding trade and other economic matters, not to mention several members of the Alliance government involved in the attack on Earth are still alive, and we must demand their extradition.
This is absurd,
Mortark said, staring at the pad with a visible mix of shock and anger.
These territorial demands are well beyond the current occupied areas. Not to mention the whole data regarding the solo operation is extremely classified, We can't just go and tell the whole galaxy about it. The names listed here are on the highest levels of our government. We can't just behead all leadership to state your bloodthirstiness.
The Alliance has the point, Furtak spoke up. These demands are quite a bit larger than you made before. Doesn't that seem a bit unreasonable?
I'll tell you what's unreasonable, Logan said, looking the aliens in their eyes with a deadly glare. To uplift a species, force them to fight in a war that they were not involved in, and then stab them in the back at the moment of triumph. To twist their DNA into a more controllable form so you can use them all over again. To insist on repeated bloodshed when all we want is what is rightfully ours. He slammed his fist against the table with the last words. Both aliens were silent for a moment, clearly at a loss to answer.
On another note,
Mortark said at last, changing the subject awkwardly,
we need to discuss the situation with the hybrids.
Logan let Johnson take the lead on this matter. He hadn't yet met the hybrids when they were awake, but from what Johnson had said of them, this was going to be interesting.
Ah, yes, Johnson said. The hybrids. The artificial species you created because you didn't have humanity to do your dirty work anymore. Implanted with the one thing you'd always regretted not having with humanity. A kill switch. How can you even begin to justify creating a slave army?
I would hardly call them slaves,
Mortark retorted.
They're barely sentient as it is.
That's not what I saw. Perhaps you never bothered to check, just like you did with humanity, Johnson said, lighting a cigarette and puffing some smoke toward the aliens.
The ethicality of the Last Resort project is not what I wanted to discuss,
Mortark said, annoyedly.
What I need to discuss is the fact that humanity has taken control of them and is using them in terroristic attacks on the core worlds of the Alliance.
We had little to do with that, Johnson said simply. That was their choice. Once we helped them realize that just because they were created to serve you, doesn't mean they have to. No matter what disease you infect them with.
Regardless, it is because of humanity's meddling that they were set loose. We demand your assistance reining them in.
Both Logan and Johnson broke out laughing, unable to maintain professionalism at such a remark. Oh, really now? You demand we help? How long is it going to take before you bastards realize we're not your ace in the hole anymore? If humanity takes a side in your little rebellion, it's not going to be one you like.
Please, gentlemen, remain civil,
Furtak said, though he was clearly growing angry with the humans. Look, here's the way things are, Logan said calmly, his tone still containing a slight hint of anger. We are at war. You chose to have this war. At the present time, humanity is winning said war. We have offered you what we consider fair stipulations. If you cannot accept this, then we will be forced to fight until surrender is unconditional.
Is that a threat, Admiral?
Mortark said incredulously. Quite so. You're fighting the New Order, fighting humanity, and now fighting your own hybrids. You're spread so thin, I'm confident that humanity is capable of victory.
I've had enough of this. Clearly you will not see reason,
Mortark said, standing up and angrily barging out of the room, leaving only Furtak behind.
I suppose if that is the end, I ought to take my leave as well,
Furtak said, standing up and bowing to the humans. Wait a moment, Logan said. We have more to discuss, like how the Order broke a pact of non-aggression not 3 days after forging it.
Ah, that. Vizak was appointed overseer of the Order's affairs in this region, but we assure you he acted without orders. His ships were rogue, and the fact that he was killed in the fighting, and the fact that we do not blame you for that, should be evidence enough. If you find that explanation sufficient, the Order will gladly maintain that pact,
Furtak explained with a bow, before hurrying out of the room. Do you believe that? Rogue ships? Johnson asked once they were alone. Not for a second, but one war at a time. There will be a time and place to deal with the New Order. Today is neither, Logan answered with a sigh. That could have gone better, but I suppose at this point we should expect little else from them. I didn't really expect to make peace today. The Alliance is too arrogant to accept that, and honestly, they deserve to see where that gets them.
I suppose that means the war goes on, Johnson said, finishing his cigarette and crushing out the ashes in a nearby ashtray. Let me speak to my hybrid friends planetside. I might be able to get them to join humanity. We'd have to support them, but I think having a foothold on the most important worlds in the Alliance is worth that price. Not to mention, they deserve the assistance.
Agreed, Logan said, opening a channel to the ship's communication officer on his pad. Send a transmission to Admiral Parker, and all ships involved in the plan, he said. The offensive is a go.
Good luck, Johnson said as Logan stood up. Give those bastards another good thrashing for me.
Logan nodded, leaving the room himself. His force would be setting out for the front lines in a day or two, and he felt like taking some time to think before getting back to business. He'd take James to see Earth. That was the only thing he wanted to do before he left. He wandered somewhat aimlessly through the ship, until he found himself on the promenade. An enormous window that ran nearly the length of the ship was along it, and he stopped, staring at the amazing view it gave of Earth and the fleet of ships surrounding it. The scrappers had wasted no time in getting to work. Almost as soon as the battle had ended, ships were tugging the wreckage to hastily constructed reclaiming depots, and the influx of materials was seen in the presence of the barely laid keels of ships in the mobile shipyards. Some material went to Earth for construction, of course. Apparently, industry was already well underway. A scrapping craft passed near to the window, tugging along a piece of wreckage that Logan recognized. It was part of the forward upper hull of the stern Resolve, the symbol of the Phoenix still visible upon it. He was amazed that even a single piece so large had survived the jump, but it reminded him of what had gone with it. Silently he stood to attention, and saluted as the wreckage passed by, in memory to Krytek, the greatest friend Logan and humanity had ever known. He sent a short transmission to the scrapper, ordering that the wreckage should be preserved instead of processed. It would make a good memorial for the Resolve. He had already shifted his flag to the UHS Unyielding Courage. It was both newer and more advanced than the Resolve had been, but from the short time he'd been aboard to officially assume command, he knew it would never feel the same. Already you could see the fleet gathering. The ships he'd led through the fires of battle were readying to head to battle once more. Some were damaged. The repair crews were working in EVA even as the ships maneuvered about. It was smaller than before. Humanity lost a lot of good men. The emotion of it all hit him for the first time since retaking Earth. He hadn't had the time to think about it during the intrigue and the battles, the planning, and the worrying. But now, as he gazed at the fleet he had led, the planet they'd won, and the species they'd saved, he looked at the part of Earth that he once called home. What had once been North America was still a barren waste, but someday it would be restored, and then he could go home. He thought of everything he lost: his parents, his sister, his nephew, his ships and crews. Now, they could finally be put to rest as humanity had its true homecoming. But before he could go home, there was one final thing to do. One terrible responsibility. The Alliance had been offered enough chances, enough olive branches. He wanted this planet to be safe for his wife and child, and for the souls of those lost to be put at peace. And to do that, humanity had to destroy the Alliance, once and for all.